Isaac Asimov's works have not had a great record when it comes to being adapted to the screen. One of the most notable attempts was that time in the late 1970s when he was asked to adapt I, Robot into a screenplay. They asked me to do the screen adaptation, and of course I refused. So they did an extraordinarily intelligent thing. They got Harlan Ellison to do it. The resulting script is easily one of the greatest science fiction movies never made. Way more than Jodorowsky's Dune. That would have been a mess. This would have been, at worst, an expensive cult film, and at best it could have set science fiction cinema on a very different course than it took in the wake of Star Wars and the expectations that set for space opera action. We opened at a sparsely attended funeral. Millions would have come to pay tribute, but only a dozen were allowed. Only the few who were closest. Stephen Byerly, the first president of the Galactic Federation, has died, and his atomized remains are being encased in a small monument on Aldebaran C-12. Robert Breitnall, a reporter for Cosmos magazine, is covering the event and is surprised to see Dr. Susan Calvin, now 82 years old, attending with 2 guards. She was one of the pioneers of robotics and rumored to have been romantically involved with Byerly. Breitnall tries to ask her a question or two, but Calvin's guards keep him back while she enters the teleport booth and zips away, leaving him standing in the rain. And so begins Breitnall's pursuit of the story of why Susan Calvin has been in hiding for decades, only to briefly emerge for the president's funeral. It's a screenplay that takes Asimov's short story collection and skillfully weaves them into a single narrative, true to the spirit of Asimov's work without being slavish to it. Asimov's stories channeled through Ellison to a medium that was heading in a different direction. Changes are made, sometimes significant changes, but they're in the service of the story, and it should be noted, Asimov really liked the script. And so Breitnall sets out on his quest to find Susan Calvin, beginning with a dive into existing records on her life and the people who knew her. Yes, a research quest. This leads him to a recording of Dr. Alfred Lanning, who had been head of US Robots, discussing the first time he met Susan, when she was still a child. This is taken from the first story in the iRobot collection, Robbie, though in the original, Susan wasn't the little girl. One of many little changes Ellison made in his adaptation. Her mother has died and her father has remarried. His new wife is part of a staunchly anti-robot church, almost a cult, and in every scene she's in, she comes across as kind of an irrational shrew. What Edward Calvin saw in her, I cannot say. He has brought home one of the robots from work, and Susan has become very attached to it. Robbie. But of course, the wicked stepmother is not happy about it. Where is it written in stone that a stepmother has to hate her husband's child? Robbie loves Susan, and more important, she loves him. Accept it, Belinda, and stop this rancor. The original short story is fairly simple. Belinda demands that Robbie be sent back to the factory. Edward complies. His daughter is very upset that her friend has been taken away, so they take her on a tour of the robot factory, hoping that seeing the production process will help her see the robots as just machines rather than as people and friends. I hope this works. If you have a better suggestion. I don't want to fight. I merely said I hope it works. If she can stop thinking of him as a person, it may bring her out of it. I don't like going there. You can always go to the church and ask for an expungement later. But of course, little kids aren't acquainted with the many hazards of industrial settings. A yellow line on the floor isn't going to keep them from darting across the room, which she does when she recognizes Robbie, her specific Robbie, working the line. Tragedy is averted when Robbie throws himself in the path of the machinery and saves Susan from being crushed. But this isn't just about Susan Calvin's backstory. It's laying the groundwork for the world as well. That was the first time I ever saw Susan Calvin. I learned what had happened later, of course. He knew that robot had been put back on the line, but I never authorized that guided tour. The child might have been killed. It was just the kind of attachment between one of our units and a human that made for such public relations difficulties, and we were having serious problems in that area. It was the year 2000, the turn of the century, and the time of the robot pogroms. Now, I want to take a little detour here. It's clear by now that this is not a sci-fi action story. It's not a hero's journey. It's a more subtle and inward-looking story that, while it has some fighting with laser guns and vistas of fantastical places, it's all in service of something else. It's more Close Encounters of the Third Kind than Star Wars. Both of those films released in 1977, but Star Wars was the phenomenal success and therefore set the expectations for science fiction films going forward. Space opera became the hot thing and countless Star Wars knockoffs were made, ranging from cult classics in their own right to bloody awful schlock. The other line of science fiction film, the 2001 and Close Encounters line of more nuanced and serious stories, was nudged aside. After all, they cost just as much or more to make and didn't bring in as much. And this is the environment that the I, Robot script was being developed in. Again, quoting from Asimov's introduction. Hollywood people are not exactly known for their ability to break out of a money-making mold. Since Star Wars had coined millions, Harlan was asked to make the robots cute like R2-D2, and they also wanted him to make Susan Calvin young and pretty like Princess Leia. Of course, giving notes like that to Harlan Ellison is a great way to spark an argument, which we'll come back to. But more to the point, this was the kind of script that a studio executive could pick up expecting the next Star Wars, only to toss aside when no one gets blasted or run through with a glowing sword in the first few minutes. Just people talking in expensive sets. I sometimes wonder what science fiction cinema of the late 70s, 80s, and even today would look like if this film had been the big sci-fi spectacle instead of or alongside Star Wars. While I can't really convey it in a brief video, this story is a slow burn mystery as Brightnell pursues his theory and keeps finding clues that don't fit. It seems to take its time, but the script never lags or meanders off its core story. It's rather tightly written for a story spanning a lifetime and a galaxy. So back to it. Brightnell has a lead on where Dr. Kelvin is, and he heads to Earth. It's just a matter of stepping into a teleport booth. They've moved past ships here. He's greeted at the booth and taken up the river by a canoe. It's one of numerous visual elements depicting a future that's high-tech but not anti-nature, not so completely constructed as to feel devoid of life. A lot of this is crafted for the visuals. Brightnell's contact is supervising a work crew of ants. Via telepathic control, the ants clear specified sections of jungle for a road and are paid in sweet foods. Dr. Calvin is thought to be holed up in a lost city, Jingu Javante, deep in the jungle valley. With the help of his contact and a very large group of ants, he gains access to the underground tunnels in the lost city, and they say their farewells. I like you, chum. You're bugfuck. But I'll likely never see you again. Soon after, he gets nabbed by the guards, but he lunges into one of them, escapes, and a jungle chase ensues. The sequence has tension, grand vistas, a tireless robot sentinel in pursuit, even a good throat punch on a guard. He finds Dr. Calvin and scares the crap out of her, making her drop an ancient vase that she'd been restoring. Not winning her over with his charm here. Behind them, we hear the guards coming. Brightnell turns and looks over his shoulder. He gets tased, carried off, and deposited back in town. Mission failure. But he's hooked now, and also his job kind of depends on it, so he takes a different approach. He travels to a rather dismal planet looking for Donovan and Powell, old colleagues of Dr. Kelvin. Those familiar with the book will recognize them from several of the stories, the first being Runaround, about a robot caught between the directives of its 3 laws and external variables, causing it to run around in circles on Mercury, which Ellison weaves into the narrative. But he also uses these characters both as a conduit to Dr. Kelvin and to convey some of the rather dense world building that happens mostly in the background. It's just hanging there that humanity has gone from putzing around the solar system to founding a galactic federation in the span of a single lifetime. Donovan and Powell are on the farthest planet out on the network of teleport booths. For decades, that's been their job, just haul new teleport booths out ever further away. As their robot Frinkle explains, "There's still need of one ship, sir, this one. How do you think the teleport booths get to the next world when there isn't a terminus there already?" My God. Every booth they plan means they've programmed themselves a little more into obsolescence. It's like self-exile. But they do it, sir. They keep right on doing it, because it's all they can do. And Central pays no attention to them, just sends through another batch of parts to construct the next booth further out. And they go, and they wait for the next jump. God, how useless they must feel. Not useless, sir. Not useless. Just terminal. And ultimately, they can't offer him any help arranging a meeting with Kelvin, so Brightnell leaves empty-handed. His casual love interest, Bernice, has a possible in, but it's a long shot. and his obsession with the story has only clawed him deeper. What kind of hold has Susan Calvin got on you? I can't name it, but I don't want to lose. Don't ask me for sense out of this. I keep running the tapes of her and Byerly together over and over. There's something there. I just can't see it. Those familiar with Asimov's book already know where this is going. What Ellison has done is managed to translate a collection of short stories into a coherent screenplay with a central narrative that works as a standalone movie, but also follows Asimov's stories closely enough to be a true adaptation, not inspired by or marketing through name recognition like that other iRobot movie that actually got made. It's very much Asimov, but it's also Ellison. Braytonall has an appointment to speak with a dead man. Well, mostly dead. Cancer of the lymph glands, frozen in advanced stage. Short of total parts replacement, we'll never be able to unfreeze him. Can I talk to him? A psych probe into the hypothalamus. He'll wake up enough so you can talk to the alpha state consciousness. And so Braytonall is a chat with Norman Boggart, who isn't thrilled with the interruption of his chilly nap waiting for a medical breakthrough. My name is Robert Braytonall. I'm a newsman for Cosmos. I've come to ask you about Susan Calvin. Then I'm still dying. You woke me up for this? How did you wake me? Am I dreaming this? We've tapped into your unconscious, sir. It's quite important. I hope you can help me. I don't want to talk to you. I take this as an imposition. Really quite selfish of you, Mr. Whomever you are. But you were very close with Dr. Calvin through the important years of... No one was close with Susan Calvin. No one and nothing but her beloved robots. Go away. Let me alone. I have dreams to dream. But he's also a frozen dude in a tube. It's not like he can just walk away. They agree to a trade of information, and it leads to an adaptation of the story Liar about Herbie, a robot that can read minds, but because of its interpretation of the first law, to avoid harming a human, Herbie usually lies about what other people are thinking, leading to a fair amount of harm anyway. The short of it is a she loves him, he loves someone else story that crushes Susan Calvin when the lying robot leads her astray. He looks up at her with his photoelectric eyes. There are tears in her eyes. What does he think of me? He loves you. But of course he doesn't. Herbie also spreads some other comforting lies that lead to some rifts in the company leadership. Two brilliant men that think they've got things all figured out, conned by a defective robot. Oh, you've caught on at last, have you? This robot reads minds. Do you suppose it doesn't know everything about mental injury? Do you suppose if you asked it a question it wouldn't give exactly the answer you want to hear? Wouldn't any other answer hurt us? And wouldn't dear, good, loving Herbie know that? Now, this script was written in the late 70s, so some silly sci-fi tropes of the time make their way into it. One of them is the old computer burns out because of a logic puzzle thing. You must tell them, but if you do, you hurt, so you mustn't. But if you don't, you hurt, so you must. But if you do, you hurt, you hurt, you hurt. And Herbie screams, a sound we've never heard on this earth before, a sound that chills us, that contains in it all the pain of inarticulate creatures senselessly murdered, small things crushed underfoot, seals bashed with ball bats, whales punctured by exploding harpoons, cows having their throats slit, millions going to the furnaces, memories of the rack and the boot and the Inquisition, a sound of horror and absolute utter agony. Incidentally, only established screenwriters can get away with stuff like that. If you're trying to break into the industry and you write a description that verbose, yeah, they're going to call you an amateur and kick you out. Herbie drops dead and we're all back with Braytonall and Boggart in the cryocrypt. So you ask me was she's Byerly's mistress, and I say, I don't know, but I doubt it. I don't think she was capable of deep affection for anyone after the thing with Ash. Braytonall's initial theory is looking shaky. He's about to leave, but Boggart reminds him of their bargain. He reluctantly sits and explains the teleportation breakthrough and the rapid expansion throughout the galaxy to a man who may never wake up to see it. But Braytonall starts to figure it out after another night of staring at old newsreels. He compares two clips of President Byerly, clips separated by 13 years, and the man hasn't aged a day. Two views separated by 13 years of the most demanding job the world has ever known, first president of the Galactic Federation. And so Braytonall contacts Powell and Donovan again, certain that this time they'll at least relay a message to Dr. Calvin. Stephen Byerly was immortal. Now will you talk to me? Later, Donovan contacts him. Dr. Calvin has agreed to meet. Braytonell thanks him and can't help but ask why they changed their minds and decided to help him after he'd been a nuisance, pestering them at the edge of the galaxy. Time's short for us. We've been around too long. Everything's past now. Little things start to mean too much, and, well, you won't think this is a big thing, but you never called us Pop. And so Braytonell and Bernice fly out to the jungle, are met by those same two guards, and taken to their comfortable accommodations. When Braytonell finally meets Dr. Calvin, it's understandably a bit awkward. But there's a moment that I really appreciate, showing the scar of Herbie's lie is still there. I owe you an apology. For continually trying to invade my privacy? No, not so much for that. I apologize for startling you when I was here last time, for causing you to drop that beautiful vase. Oh yes, I'd forgotten. No, you didn't. As previous dialogue progresses, camera pulls back from Braytonell and circles to include Calvin. She smiles for an instant at his remark, then the smile tightens. You're right, I didn't forget, but I accept the apology. During this time, Dr. Calvin slowly reveals the truth of President Byerly's death and her connections to him. And through that, we get another glimpse of the incredibly condensed history. It seems that every once in a while, there are years where centuries happen. The Federation was founded 2 years into the Four Worlds War, of which Earth was one of the belligerents. Byerly negotiates with all of them, somehow finding exactly what they need to agree to peace. And a new golden age dawns. We see glimpses of those events in a series of vignettes. Byerly brokering the Union, crafting the Manifesto of Equality to govern the Federation, elevating the robots from slaves to partners, masterminding the program of galactic colonization, more or less inventing the teleport booths. We don't actually see Steve Byerly turn water into wine while he's walking on it, but it would fit right in. Tell me, Braytonell, do you think people, for the most part, are good? I think they'd like to be good. It's not always easy. Calvin, again through flashbacks to a close adaptation of one of Asimov's stories, tells us about Lenny, a defective robot. The positronic brains are meant to be encoded with all the knowledge they need to perform their intended function. But with Lenny, it didn't take. I came in to run the preliminary vocalizing test, just like it says to do here on my clipboard, and I walked up to each one of these Lennys, and I said to Lenny 1, just like it says to say, "How are you?" And Lenny 1 answers, real nice and clear, "I am well and ready to begin my functions, sir. I trust you are well, too." Well, that was what he was supposed to say, no? But then I got to Lenny 9. I said, "How are you?" And he said, "As best as I can repeat it, sir, do-da goo-goo da-da-da." The company plans to melt the defective machine down, but Dr. Calvin sees an opportunity here. Essentially a baby robot, clean slate. It has to learn just like a human child. It could be very informative both in terms of robots and human development. There are many setbacks, of course, a safety incident that turns out to have been the result of a dumbass human trying to squeeze pennies for one. And what does all that have to do with Byerly? Right. So during the war, the planet was run mostly by a supercomputer. As Dr. Calvin explains, the Earth Central Computer Complex, it filled 1,100 square kilometers in the deepest caverns of the planet. As life grew more complex, as war grew more tactically impossible for humans to coordinate, more and more was turned over to the computer. And they built it bigger, and like all systems, it fed itself, concerned itself much with maintaining itself as it did with providing for the needs of the people it served. And each of the other worlds had similar complexes. Byerly saw what was happening. The computers had taken over the war and determined it was in their interest to keep it going. A fully automated military-industrial complex. So Byerly went to shut down the Earth Central Computer. The sequence that follows would likely have been one of the most impressive bits of cinematic spectacle of its day. They fight in the mind of the central computer, a battle of mathematics and logic played out symbolically on screen. At the end of which, Robert Braytonell, investigative journalist, still doesn't quite get it. Your investigation was excellent. Your conclusion was wrong. Stephen Byerly wasn't immortal. He was a robot. Catch up, Bob. Byerly, the president, the founder of the Galactic Federation, was Lenny. That's why the body had to be atomized, not merely interred. And we close with Braytonall back at the gravesite, delivering his report to the galaxy. Some of you may be sickened that our destiny was in the mind and the relays of a creature never born of man and woman. Stop and consider. A war that would surely have destroyed us was averted, and for over 40 years we have moved forward. There has never been a single human who could have done that for us. Susan Calvin's soul was in the mind of Stephen Byerly. She was called a misanthrope all her life, one who hated humanity without reserve. But she loved us better than we knew. She loved what we could be, what we were capable of being. And when we failed, when our flaws were greater than our godhood, her love turned to hate. Yet from her loneliness and her hate, she gave us salvation. And Stephen Byerly came to her finally and said his work was done, that it was time for the human race to be on its own again. There are a lot of reasons this movie didn't get made. Some of it was legal disputes. The rights were held up over various internal studio issues. Budget was a major factor. The film was expected to cost as much as $30 million, $1978. For comparison, Close Encounters cost about $19 million and Star Wars a mere $11 million. But perhaps the biggest obstacle was Harlan Ellison. Ellison's intro to the published script is much more involved than Asimov's, partly because he relays the odyssey of dealing with the studio as he saw it. For example, his first meeting with the head of Warner Brothers after delivering the finished script is recounted thus. When this jerk, who was the head of the studio, received the manuscript, and we waited and waited for his input, and weeks went by and we heard nothing. I finally asked to have a meeting with him to find out what was happening. And in the course of that meeting, during which he mumbled nebulosities without specificities, it became clear that he had never even read the script. This cannot be, I thought, with genuine horror. Can you understand what was happening? Here was a man, head of production for one of the greatest film factories in the world, talking about spending between $17 and $20 million on an international project that would tie up Warner Brothers for at least 2 years, employ thousands and thousands of people, and not only bring to life a work on which I'd spent a full year of my life and talent, but at last, after 20 years of unsuccessful attempts, send Isaac's wonderful positronic cycle to hungry audiences throughout the world. Who was making imbecile suggestions based wholly on presses of the complex and far-flung story by anonymous readers from his staff. This cannot be, I thought. I'm having a nightmare. So I set out to verify my suspicion. I began asking him specific questions on pivotal points in the plot. His responses were vague, general, disingenuous. I was certain I'd found him out, but just to make absolutely certain, I asked him how he liked such and such, a major scene that did not occur in the screenplay at all. He admired that part, he said. He thought that part worked very well indeed, he said. At that point, I knew he was simply shucking and jiving, and I pulled his covers. You haven't read the script, I said. What do you mean? Just what I said. You haven't read a word of this material. I spent a year on it. You're planning to commit to the biggest project the studio has ever attempted, and you haven't even had the sense of responsibility to look at the work personally. Not only are you creatively irresponsible, but fiscally you're just dancing on thin ice. You've got the intellectual capacity of an artichoke. Ellison goes on to say that he laid hands on the studio head and gave him an ultimatum that he had 24 hours to read the script before going home quivering with rage. Ellison could be rather intense. Warner Brothers dropped him from the project and brought in a litany of other writers who couldn't quite hack the script. They shopped the hack jobs around to directors without much interest until Irvin Kershner, fresh off directing The Empire Strikes Back, agreed to direct I, Robot on the condition that they bring Ellison's script back, which they agreed to do and then backed out of. I mentioned legal issues. It bounced around for a few years, and here we are. Ellison's I, Robot was not a perfect script, and some of it seems rather dated looking at it now. But had this movie been made, had it been out in the world roughly contemporary with Star Wars, we might have had a very different science fiction cinema landscape. It blends some of the slower, more cerebral storytelling of films like Close Encounters, 2001, and of course Asimov's writing, with the spectacle of Star Wars and the imitators it spawned. It could have paved the way for more serious science fiction films, less space opera, and more idea-based speculation. Of course, it might have ended up like David Lynch's Dune, an expensive flop. Either way, it's a bit of a paradox. No one but Ellison could make it work, but more than any other factor, it's probably Ellison that killed the project. Gotta pick your battles, I suppose. You know, Ibsen once said, "To live is to war with trolls." Truncated quotes are often the best quotes.